Hi, this is Vivian and Pearl. This is our first episode of POV Almost There. Hey Viv.
Hey, how are you doing?
Pretty good. And on the get-go, I want to be honest and say that this is not our first attempt at our first episode.
Let's not lie.
We're not gonna set any precedents of dishonesty in this podcast. We tried this out. We did a full episode. We did a lot of research. We had a whole conversation and looked back on it and decided this doesn't really capture the essence of us.
Yeah.
So we're deciding to do this again. Hopefully second time is the charm.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, we want to say, because we forgot to mention, that Vivian and I are in different locations. So I'm actually in Geneva in Switzerland, and you are?
I'm in Toronto, Canada.
Right, so that's why we're on Zoom, and
Yeah.
if there's any audio glitches, we apologize.
Audio, visual. If we just stop and stare at each other, not say anything, you know what's happening.
It's happened before.
Yeah.
So for this first episode, we thought that it would be cool to talk a little bit more about ourselves and maybe focus on one of the biggest sort of things that we have in common, which is that we both used to move around a lot growing up because of our parents' work. And there's actually a lot to unpack there, and I'm pretty sure we'll talk about it more in the future. But today we can sort of start that conversation a bit and talk about the places we've lived and our experiences.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I think it also just will give a lot of context to who we are and some of the perspectives and opinions we share. So, I think this is just a good place to start, a good foundation, hopefully.
Awesome.
This is the actual first episode.
We're not even going to mention what our first try was about. We're not going to talk about her.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's start. Why don't you go? Can you tell us about where you've lived and where you're from and stuff?
Yeah. So I am, like I said in the trailer, I'm originally Kenyan, and I lived there for 5 years, and then moved for the first time to South Africa when I was 5, and then lived there for 4 years. Mozambique when I was 9, and then lived there for 2.5, 3 years, I think. So then we moved back to Kenya when I was 12. Is this math correct? And then we lived in Kenya for also around 2.5 years, 3 years. I think it was 3. I'm already noticing errors. But we then moved to Panama when I was 14 or 15. That's where we met. And then I moved to... Oh, and then we lived there for 4 years. Graduated from high school, and now I'm here in Canada for university. And I've been here almost 5 years now.
I was actually gonna suggest, I totally forgot, I was gonna suggest that we both guess where we each have lived. And I was gonna
you
try
already
to guess
know
where
I'm
you
gonna disappoint you, so we can't do that. This is not the first episode thing.
As you were talking, I realized I got the countries right, but I got the timeline wrong of where I thought you had lived.
I think I could guess your countries, but the timeline would be off.
Go ahead, try.
Let's not.
Don't worry about the timeline. Just guess.
No. You go.
Okay. So I was born in Myanmar, and I lived there until I was 7, and then I moved to Singapore for 2 years, and then I moved to Kenya for 1 year. Then I moved to Sierra Leone for 2 years. Then I was in the Dominican Republic for 2 years. And then I moved to Panama for 4 years, where I met you. And then I moved to London for university, and now I'm in Switzerland. So those are our timelines.
Yeah.
This is worldwide. And even though we lived in Panama for 4 years for high school, our families sort of remained back in Panama for a few more years. I think both of our families left around similar times.
Yeah. I think maybe 3 years after we left.
Yeah, they I think total they both stayed for 7 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll get more into like how we know each other and stuff in like another episode, because I guess we're talking more about moving today.
Yeah.
So is there like, I know that it's so hard to choose, and it's so weird when someone asks me like, where's your favorite place that you've ever lived? And do people ask you that?
Yeah, I get that.
Do people ask you that?
Yeah.
What do you say? What do you normally say?
You know, like the cliche, like every place had its perk, which is true. Like there's there's a highlight to each place I've lived. And it's actually a hard question to answer too, because I lived in different places at very different stages of my life. So, you know, like obviously it was great living in some places when I was younger, when I had like, is it rose-colored glasses? Like, you know, everything's just like nice, no worries, parents feed you, no bills. And then some places like, my experience in Toronto has been great, like living independently. So, yeah, it's very different. Do you want me to actually answer my favorite?
I mean, if you have one, go ahead, but you don't have to. You don't have to pick.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. But what about you? Do you get that question? Okay. What do you usually say?
Yeah, I do. I normally say it's the last place that I lived is my favorite, because I think whenever they ask me, like, I'm probably still nostalgic about the place that I just left. Sure. So I say it's the last place I've lived. But definitely, so now I'll say like, oh, I miss London because I was just there. But I still always say Panama, because I think I lived there the longest, because everywhere else I lived like 2 years each, and in Panama I lived for 4 whole years. So there's a lot more memories there. And it was also during our high school years, which are like really, really important years. So we made so many memories and we went through so many changes. So it just feels like home. It feels like a lot of my growing and memories are in that place.
I feel that. I think I mean, the high school side of it, lots of stress and anxiety, but living in Panama was actually a great experience. And I think just in terms of like, the climate, the was scenery the right word? Like so much greenery, and we lived in an area that was like heavily forested. So I think being surrounded by that was just a whole very different experience. And then also people were very friendly. Obviously there was like difficulties with communication and learning Spanish, but and we'll talk a bit about that in a second, but I think I also still reference Panama a lot. There are a lot of nice memories made there.
Yeah, I think Panama was like a really good place for families. I think we got lucky that it was a good place for like education, but also to grow up. And like you said, like we lived like a few streets away from each other, and like it was a huge like jungle, and there were so many like trees and parks, like huge parks, and it's really good for us that we got to grow up there. But yeah, I was gonna ask you. You mentioned Spanish, right? So I guess was Panama because Mozambique, they speak Portuguese, don't they? Was that the first, like, which countries did you have that language barrier or difficulty?
So yeah, everywhere that I lived, I did have to learn a new language, but South Africa is like predominantly English speaking, so that wasn't too difficult of an adjustment to make. But in Mozambique, they speak Portuguese, so I had to learn that in school. But like I said, I was young, so I wasn't having to like ask for directions or do things for myself a lot of the time. So I think maybe my parents encountered that, I wouldn't say struggle, maybe challenge a bit more than I did. But like Mozambicans are very, very friendly. So that was also never too much of an issue. And then after that, it's Panama. I had to learn Spanish there. So like those are the only two places where you had to learn it, because if you got lost in the middle of nowhere, you'd otherwise be hopeless.
Did you like really pick up a lot of Portuguese? Do you remember any? Okay, pretend I didn't ask.
No. I actually, it helped me when I was learning Spanish, because there were a lot of similarities, and like I was young, so I wasn't also taking it as seriously as I should have been. But I think I got to a level where I could introduce myself and hold a very surface level conversation, like, what's your favorite color? And I like apples.
Yeah. I mean, at that age, that's really all you need to say.
Exactly.
So that's pretty good.
What about you? Did you, apart from Panama, did you have to learn any language anywhere else?
No, because in Kenya everyone spoke English. Sierra Leone everyone spoke English. I only started to have language barriers when I moved to the Dominican Republic because they do speak Spanish, and that was the first time I had lived somewhere that you really needed to learn the native language to be able to, do anything there. I did go to an English speaking school, which was really good. So like everyone I knew at school and teachers and stuff, everyone spoke English. But then once we got out of the class, my peers, my friends, they would just immediately switch to Spanish, and they only really spoke Spanish like when we were just hanging out. So I think I had to pick it up really quickly, and I did pick it up quicker than I thought it would. I think because out of necessity. My friends would try to switch to English when they spoke to me, but regardless, I was always hearing their conversations and stuff. So I think when I moved to Panama, I had it a little bit easier because I already had a foundation of Spanish, and it only sort of improved as I lived there longer. And yeah, for sure. Other than that, I've had no language barriers. And like exactly what you said, when you're a kid, it's like fun, it's easy because you're moving around, and like your one huge problem is that you're in a different place and you need to make new friends, but you eventually do that. But don't you feel so bad for our parents? Imagine having to move a family and children and not speaking the language and having to figure it out and get a house and schools, and like I don't know how they did it.
I always think about that, like when I moved here and I kind of like moved out of student residence, and I was like, okay, finding apartments, putting my stuff in storage, and then moving all my stuff to like the new place. And I was just like, my parents did this in a country where they didn't speak the native language. And and even just flying, like going to an airport with little children, and they're like, oh, I can help you, I'll do this, I'll hold the passport and the tickets, which all of this is me, so it's not even my other sisters. So kudos to them, because I can't imagine how stressful, overwhelming that might be. But they also just didn't show it, to be honest. Like I mean, sometimes maybe they'd be like really relaxed, but they were never like, they never showed that like high stress.
Yeah, I think also, I don't know if it's just the lens of being a child, but everything seems okay and safe because you're with your parents and they got it covered.
Yes.
Yeah, it was only when I got a little bit older that my mom was like, because when we moved to the Dominican Republic, my dad wasn't with us because he was called to work at a different place. So we got to Dominican Republic and he immediately left like the next day. So my mom was on her own. She didn't speak any Spanish. She had to find a school for me, a house for us, a car for us. And she did it all. And at the time I didn't notice anything. I was like, awesome, we have a house now. Cool, we're to school. But then like as I got older, my mom was telling me that like she was terrified and she was so stressed and she had no idea what she was doing. And you were a kid, so what would I have really been able to do? But like it just makes me appreciate our parents a little more.
I think the most I contributed was like style advice when we were picking furniture. I was like, I think that couch is the best one. And they look at it and they're like, no, we'll go with the other one. So it's true. I think they carried a lot on their shoulders and they carried it well, but I imagine there's a lot there. I'd love to have that conversation with them too if they ever join us on this podcast.
We'll see.
Yeah, Pearl, what are some of the things that you kind of encountered that were roadblocks in your experience?
I think, oh my god, where would we even begin? But I think a lot of challenges, you sort of realize them retrospectively as you get older, and you realize that those were really difficult for you, that those really affected you. I think one of the more sort of obvious things that stood out to me was culture shock. Culture shock in different ways. So I think maybe the biggest one might have been when I was living in Singapore and then I moved to Kenya, because I had never been out of Asia before, and even though I was in Singapore, I was still very close to Burma. So like it didn't feel like I was very far away from home. So Kenya was the first place we moved to that was like really, really far from where I was born. And the culture shock wasn't necessarily because of the things around me, but I had always gone to a public school until I moved to Kenya, because in Kenya then I went to like this British international school, and it was the classes and the structure and the way that like they teach was just so different from what I was used to. There were so many extracurricular activities and like so many options, and sports was never a thing that I was used to. We never had like sports teams and stuff. There was like a court, and if you want to play, you go and play. That's at least what I was used to. And they had like structured like sports teams and like classes and music and like things that like as a child like you get so excited about and want to do all of them. And that was the first time I was given those options, and I felt like such a luxury, and it felt like I was in like I was in like a different dimension. It was fun. And then the classes that they taught were really, really awesome, because I was like 9 years old when I moved, and they had a class for us called like religious studies, which I think where I was from I would have never had the opportunity to be in a class like that, especially that young. And that's a really good age to introduce different religions to young children and show them that. And it just really changed like a lot of things for me and the way that I see things, because I was suddenly exposed to so many different things so quickly. But maybe it's because I was a child. Like when you're young, you adapt really quickly and well, and I didn't feel overwhelmed by anything. I met a bunch of new different people. I met people from all over the world with different backgrounds and religions and like ethnicities, and I didn't think, oh, I'm in such a different place. I was just like, cool, we have swimming next class. Like I was so focused on the fun things that like I think it's a good thing that I was sort of introduced to a different country and lived in a different country at such a young age, because then you don't have time to have prejudice towards anyone. You don't have time to feel any sort of way about where you are and the people around you, because you're just so young that you just want to have a good time. And I think that's good to instill that at a young age. Yeah,
that's a really good point.
What about you? Did you have culture shock?
Yeah. But before I go into that, I was just gonna say that's a really good way of putting it, because you are learning about yourself in an environment that is very different from who like you are, and so you're very open to things that aren't you're very open to things that you may not have been exposed to if you hadn't moved. And I shared a very similar experience. The first time I moved, I was 5, and I guess the biggest culture shock for me, or the biggest shock for me, was that I joined a Catholic school, like an all-girls Catholic school. And when I was in Kenya, when I was in Kenya, I went to Msingi Bora, which is just like a kindergarten, and I guess it was kind of diverse, but it was majority like other black kids. And then moved to South Africa, and then I think I was the only black girl in my class. I can see the class picture in my head. So I think there are a lot of things I was encountering for the first time. So one of them being very strict religious beliefs. And I wouldn't say they were like heavily imposed on me, but I'm also very impressionable at that age. And so, whatever you are being told is the right thing to do or the right way to live is like, an adult is telling me this, so this must be right. And so there was like that aspect of it in terms of like religion, but I come from a Christian family and I have been raised Christian, so it wasn't such a significant shift. It was just like some of the practices that were different. And then we had mass every week, like once every week, so we had to do that. I think what I enjoyed most about mass was like singing. And I'm just trying to imagine what it must have been like for the teachers, just like a bunch of it's called grade naught, which is like grade 0, I guess, kindergarten to 3rd graders, just like chanting from like the deepest part of their lungs. So I think religion was one, race was another, being like there were other black girls in my year, But like, yeah, we're obviously the minority, and I wouldn't say I really experienced racism, but you know, you are aware that you are different in that environment. And then, although I did experience that in other places outside of school, for sure. And then, yeah, like you've mentioned, you're young, new environment, so you're really just trying to take it in. Very different people from you that you're learning from. I remember we had like the cultural days. I don't know if you had those growing up, where like everyone comes in their like
yes
traditional attire, and then
international day,
exactly. Yeah. And then you bring in like your native food, and then like, you know, you have like a stand and display stuff. So those were always very interesting, because even within South Africa itself, like you had people from different tribes or different ethnic groups, or just very different backgrounds. So the food was always immaculate, and so yeah, I think in terms of challenging aspects, culture shock is definitely something I experienced. I think one of the biggest culture shocks for me was actually moving to Panama, because like we said, the language was a significant thing. It was my first time living outside of Africa, and so there was a lot there. And then also there was like, for me, the tension between home life and school life, because I was in such a new environment at school where I was like trying to fit in. It's also just the start of high school, which is such a bad time to move, because
it really is.
Everyone had kind of solidified their friendships in 8th grade, so I'm coming in like fresh faced 9th grade, and we're all coming into high school together. So all the 9th graders are trying to be like, oh yeah, look at me, upper years, I'm cool, like we're all, you know, like let's all be friends. So there's a bit of a cutthroat nature to 9th grade. I don't know, maybe that was just my experience.
No, that's true. And that's a thing that like you went through, I guess, because we should have mentioned, we went to different schools.
Yeah, we did.
And you went to a school that like had been established for a long time, so the kids there had been there a long time, and they were moving up grades together, and you sort of came in like a new person. And I started at a school where the year that I joined was like the year that it was a brand new school. So everyone that came in my grade were all new from different places. So you used to tell me about that.
Yes. The people were great. You guys are great. But it's hard. You're learning a new language. It's a very new environment. And then like, I think their parents are also, well, first off, they'd lived there longer, so their parents would also like feel more secure letting them go out and do stuff, like go to the malls and hang out together. And I think my parents were still like, you know, trying to like, who are you with? Where are you going? Like, you know, have your phone on, be ready to call me, all of that stuff.
Wait. Do you think that both our parents were like that? But do you think that it's because we were at a new place, or do you think that culturally it didn't matter? They would have just been like overprotective regardless?
That's a good question. I mean, we were also teenagers, so now we're trying to hang out without them. It's like, oh, I'm gonna hang out at this friend's place, and you're not gonna be there. So yeah, that's a good question. Maybe it would have been that way anyway. But I know my parents did specifically tell me, you know, because we're here alone and we don't have family here, so it's good to like just be very cautious of where your surroundings, where you are, and then me letting them know where I am a lot of the time. And so I think I experienced that tension a lot, where it's like, obviously my parents want to be a lot more careful, and then I'm like, let me live, I want to like do high school to the fullest. You know, and I actually respect them a lot for letting me do the amount that they did, because now that I'm older and I've just like been exposed to a lot more stuff, I don't know, I'm just grateful that I got the experiences I did when I got them.
Yeah, me too, I think. And when you were mentioning about like being a minority in different places that you've lived, that's certainly something that I've experienced, and that's something that I noticed and realized was a challenge in the meantime when it was happening, but also retrospectively of how much it affected me, I only realized later on. So everywhere I moved, right after I left Singapore, I was the only Asian person wherever I moved. Like in my classes, sometimes in my whole school, my surroundings, I was always the only Asian person. So in Kenya, I didn't have any Asian friends in my classes. Literally nobody was Asian but me. And then in Sierra Leone, there was actually this one Korean boy who was there before me. But then as soon as I arrived, like 3 months later, he left. It was like, he was like, all right, you got it from here. I'm out. Like, only one of us can be there. And he left. So it was just me. And then Dominican Republic, nobody. And then in Panama, there were like 5 other Asian kids in like smaller classes. They were in like kindergarten. But so obviously nobody in my grade or people I would have hung out with were Asian. And that 100% effect, I didn't know that how bad it was affecting me to not have people around me that could relate to me or that I could see myself in. But I also did sort of experience some sort of, I don't want to call it racism because I think, because we were really, really young. We were like 9 years old. So I don't think that this child knew what she was saying when she was saying it to me, but it certainly came from a place of like learned discrimination, I think. And it really shocked me, and I don't know, and from then on I just became really aware that I was not like them. Like I said, when I first moved to Kenya, I didn't feel any different because I was, you know, in like this childlike days of everything's fine, we're all friends. And then when this girl said something to me, then I really noticed that I was different, I think. And I stayed sort of being very aware of that as time went on.
That's actually a really good point. Like a lot of it is also retrospective, like you said. Like you start to, especially when you're older, you start to look at maybe things like beauty standards or, you know, just the way that your own body image has been shaped by your experiences. And every time you kind of looked in the mirror and then internalized the thought someone else had projected on you, like it's something that you kind of have to shed later, but you sometimes don't even realize in the moment how impactful it is. Are there any other challenges that you experienced, or should we go over to
why don't we were talking about this as we do, of like what would we do in the future, like would we want to give our kids the same experience as we had, like traveling around and living in different places? Would you?
Me? I think I would. I would definitely love to. I'm studying architecture, so I'm not entirely sure if I could do it in the exact same way that like I grew up, where we're moving every 2 to 4 years. But I think I would like it, especially just for the exposure. When you're really young, you're taking stuff in. Your mind is really malleable. The way you think is really malleable. So like when you brought up being exposed to different religions when you were young, I got that too in 3rd grade. Fifth grade. And I just remember in the moment, it was like we visited a synagogue, we visited a church, we went to a mosque, a temple, and you know they're going around and showing us all the significant like artifacts or what are they called, ceremonies and traditions and attire, and you're just like, whoa, wow, you know, I wouldn't have otherwise known this. You have very little bias or prejudice towards what you're seeing. If I do decide to have children later, I think that's definitely something I would want to expose them to. Even if I'm maybe not able to move around as much, I think the exposure aspect is something I would love to give them. And then also learning new languages, it really challenges you to think differently and then improve your communication skills. So I would love that. And then also just for myself, I think there's so much more of the world I would love to see. It's a bit selfish, and I think I would still want that for myself. What about you?
No, that sounds like a really good plan, especially because you enjoy it so much. And for me, I'm really happy that I had the experiences that I had. I'm really grateful for all of it. Like, it completely shaped who I am and the things that I know, and it taught me to sort of appreciate different people and different cultures in a way that I would never want to change. And but I think maybe our situations are a little bit different because you have siblings. So when you moved places, you moved with them. And I'm an only child. So wherever I moved, I was alone with my parents, and I didn't really have like friends, you know? So it was difficult for me to make those moves and start life all over again instead of having like a little unit. So I think it affected me in like a different way, where now that I'm older, I'm noticing that I sort of crave stability. And like young people our age are like, only now they're like, okay, like I'm old enough now, I'm gonna travel the world, I'm gonna do all this, I'm gonna do all that. And I'm like, I did that, I don't want to do it right now. I don't want to travel and do all these things right now. I want to do what you had your whole life, which is like stay in one place and like get to know the people there and like invest in the relationships and friendships there, because everyone's always like, oh, you moved around, that's so cool, you have friends all over the world. It's like, yeah, I have a lot of friends, but not, there's quantity but not quality. And
like it almost becomes like their acquaintances, because you really just have them on Facebook and you're seeing updates and you're like not really engaging or sorry, keep going.
How can you really properly invest in relationships where we are together for like a year, 2 years, and then you don't see each other for 12 years? It's difficult. So I think if I were to have a family and children, I would like to give them something that I didn't have, which is which I think has an effect on both emotional, mental, and like physical well-being, is stability and security of being in somewhere that you can really identify as home. The people around you make that place a home, and you can, even when they're older, they can go off and do whatever they want, travel, do what you want, but then they know that they have somewhere to come back to that's going to feel like, you know, home base, which I don't really feel like I have. And I think that there's different ways. I just certainly want to expose them and give them the experiences similar to what I had, so that they can experience things firsthand and learn to appreciate things. But I think that there's different ways to do that for them instead of having to live there for a long time. And I think the privilege is that because I did all of that, I have a lot of friends and family members who are from so many different like cultural and cultural backgrounds, that these people are going to be in their lives
anyway,
and so ultimately they're going to be exposed to it one way or another. So I don't feel like we need to move around a lot to do that. But I mean, moving once or twice, like I would be open to it. I just don't want to uproot our lives as often as I did when I was young.
And you can also definitely accomplish it just through travel, like going places during holidays. I think there's very different experiences though in, I guess, the moving side of it, because you are there for such a long period of time that you kind of start to like move with the wave, and then once you kind of get in sync, you're moving again. I think there are definitely things that I would try to, if I chose that path, like moving forward, I think I would definitely do some soul searching and understand ways in which like that could be, I don't know if the right word is improved, but like, you know, things like therapy, you know, and checking in and being like, you know, how are you doing at school? What are you struggling with? etc socially. But I mean, you know, also like life happens, and I think that's also something that I kind of watched happen to my parents, which is like opportunities arose, and then it's like you weigh your options, and it's like moving there is the best option. And I think, or like watching my parents do that, I think, you know, each time the move that they made was the best option, especially in terms of like, for them career-wise, for us in terms of like education, exposure. I feel like sometimes life will happen, and then you get a place and be like, oh, I didn't plan that.
Our parents are certainly not moving us around with the intention of anything other than like for our benefit. I certainly understand that, and also children are different. You never know how they'll react to moving around and how it will affect them in the future. And even when I was moving around, I had no problem with it. I loved it when I was moving around. It's only now that I'm older, because up until college I thought I was really good at moving, really good with change, really good at adapting, because I've always been told that I was, just because I did it. But then when I got to university, I realized how much I craved stability.
Yeah.
And the different ways that it's affected me. But like I wouldn't change it for the world, because now I feel like I belong in so many different places. Even if I've lived in somewhere for like a short period of time, visiting somewhere for holidays and actually living there and coexisting with the people and the life is a totally different thing. And now I feel like this love and like allegiance to every place and every people that I like lived with, because like they're a part of who I am, and being in that country with these people and their culture sort of nurtured my development. So, you know, I do feel very connected to every place that I've lived.
Yeah. Okay, great. Then now maybe we can go over to our reflections and like, you know, I think you've also talked a bit about it right now, but like, you know, how do you feel now looking back on it? And you know, where you are, and if you were to evaluate, and obviously you said like whether you would do it in the future, but have you kind of had moments where you're like, oh, I might be like this, or I might do things like this because of that experience?
Just positive things, or that I don't feel uncomfortable around different people. Doesn't matter how different they feel from me, or if I've never encountered them, like I don't feel uncomfortable. I feel like I can talk to anybody. I feel like I just feel like there's a connection between so many people that that's not an issue for me. But what I do struggle with is constantly feeling like an outsider. And I notice that even when I'm being totally included, I still feel like I'm not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
I feel it in friend groups. I feel it in like relationships and friendships where I sort of see things in like a temporary lens, because I used to sort of just up and leave forever. So I think that's that's affected me right now.
Me right now, I would say very similar. That not feeling tied to one place, especially when I'm talking to my friends now and like we're almost graduating and they're thinking of like, oh, would I go study or do my master's in another country, and they're thinking of the challenges of that, and I'm like, go do it, it's great, expose yourself. And you know, they're like, oh, but my family's here, and you know, all the other considerations that you have to make. And then, you know, we like lightly talk about like, oh, having kids, and I'm like, whoa, would I live here if I had kids? Like that kind of thing. So it has definitely made me realize that when I plan or think about my life in the future, it's definitely not tied to location. I think I'm very flexible in that sense, which is good, but not so great when, like you said, you're thinking of like friendships and relationships, because then you do have to do that extra work to maintain them and keep people in your life. And I also just think in terms of like attachments. I think the way I make friends, the way I meet people, I feel like I'm I don't want to gas myself up, but like, you know, like if I meet someone new, it's not very difficult to start a conversation or create a friend, some sort of bond there. The upkeep of that, I'm not so great at. I'm working on it. And then also you know, like I may give the impression that this is a lasting friendship, and it's not that that's not what it is for me, but I worry sometimes that I may give people the wrong impression. And it has been a challenge sometimes as well when like people do ask like, oh, where are you gonna be in 10 years? And I'm like, oh, please. I can't think that far ahead. But then also my view of the world, I guess, is very different. And you do kind of reach a point where you acknowledge paradox and nuance, and things that are opposite to each other or seemingly opposite can both be true. And like, I guess like you're more accepting of things that don't align with what you've been taught or what you might believe, even though you may not necessarily agree with them. You're like, yeah, that's your truth, or you know, that's a truth. I think that's how those are ways that this has shaped my views.
Yeah, definitely. When you're like talking to a bunch and you become friends with them and you have teachers that are so different from you, and you sort of just realize that nobody is like has bad intentions or are bad people. They've just grown up in a very different way, and this is just how they see the world, and then you're not so fazed by it anymore. You're like, that's how he thinks, and that's cool. Do you do this? I wanted to ask you, do you plan things and like see your life in like blocks of time instead of like one continuous plan? Yeah, do you?
I do.
Like when you plan, you don't think, okay, for my life I foresee this for like the indefinite future. Like I can't think like that. I plan in like 2 to 4 year intervals, and within those intervals I have plans of what I would do, and then at the end of it, I don't know what it is, but I foresee a big change or a switch, and then I'll move on to the next block of time, is how I see things in my life.
Are you my therapist? I feel like I just had like a realization. Yeah, I think that might also really explain the stress, I don't want to use the word anxiety, or whatever else I've been feeling right now, because I'm kind of reaching the end of my 5-year block, which is university. So I'm about to graduate, and I'm in that phase where I'm like, okay, so now I'm going to apply for jobs, and I'm preparing my portfolio, and like, I'm trying not to limit myself in terms of things that I could go into, but like there's a general fear and uncertainty, and it's exciting, but it's also just like and that's a really good point. I never thought of it like that. I always planned my life that way, but I wasn't very conscious of it. So thank you. I think it explains a lot for me right now.
Right, so that was a bit of like an introduction of our stories moving around, and there's plenty more where they come from. We could go in depth into so many different more things. This is just the tip of the iceberg. And so we'll probably talk about it again in the near future, if especially our high school period of time, because a lot happened in those 4 years. So I think that we can make plenty of episodes about these.
Yeah, and like you said, we could probably go into each place we lived and just spend a whole episode exploring that. Which we don't know if we're gonna do that, but it's definitely possible. So stay tuned. There's definitely more stories from those experiences coming.
And I think now we'll wrap up the episode, and this is something that we want to do every episode that we tried in our first take of this episode. So we're going to do it again. This time Viv is going to do it. So every episode, each of us, one of us is going to share a POC story, sometimes about inspiring POC stories or young POC people who are doing really incredible things in the world that should be receiving more attention because they're not really getting the exposure in mainstream media.
So today's POC success story is Ghislain Irakoze. I hope I pronounced that okay. So he was inspired or called to action through the significant waste problem that he witnessed in his hometown. He was working on a group project when he was 12 with a classmate, and when they visited the landfill, he was not just surprised by it, but also his friend got injured. And his realization in that moment and later was that, had waste been addressed in a more efficient and effective way, that would not have happened. That experience would not have happened. And so now at 20, he is the CEO of WasteZone, which is a phone app that, a phone app that connects users and consumers to recycling industries. And so if you have solid waste recyclables in your home, you're able to sell them for points and perks on this app to people in the industry. And they've created a significant impact in their in the capital city, Kigali, where they've recycled or contributed to the recycling of 460 tons of electronics. And additionally, with support from Tunza Eco Generation, which is a Samsung engineering initiative, Waystone has provided training to 70 high school students in his hometown, which has exposed them to skills and knowledge that enables them to create products and create innovative things out of recycled plastic. And so, in addition to the impact that they're having with their app in terms of recycling and connecting, kind of closing the loop in terms of circular economy, they're also just doing great things with people in their communities and connecting with other young, passionate individuals who want to be a part of this kind of change, which I think is really great.
That is so awesome. And it only really takes one person to believe in their idea and do something about it to have an effect on so many different people. I love community champions that have the initiative and the vision and the work ethic to get things done for themselves and their communities.
Yeah, and it sets precedent too, right? So if someone comes in the future and is like, I'm really passionate about this one thing, there's kind of a framework of how it's done in your community, and then you're able to like, it kind of gives you that confidence to be like, I'm not the first doing this. I can learn from their mistakes, obviously make my own, but I think it's great for just like young people to feel empowered to do these kinds of things that might seem very much larger than us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people as you get older will realize that you're very capable of doing anything that you see other people doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Me now.
Anyways, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I guess that's it for this episode. Hopefully we're happier with this than we were with the last one, and we'll actually release this.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And yeah, so if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts, we just want you to know that we have a YouTube platform where you could go and see our faces, see our reactions to
if you're into that.
Yeah, to like what each other is saying. And in the description on YouTube, we'll have links to whatever we've mentioned, the POC success story that we've highlighted. And then you're also welcome and encouraged to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where we can interact.
We might have done too much.
Yeah, we went all the way there. But yeah, if you want to interact with us, maybe give us suggestions for any episodes that you'd like to see. And yeah.
Our handle, did you mention our handle?
Thank you. Our handle on all of those platforms is at POV Almost There. So search for us on that and follow us. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Yeah, talk to you soon.